Someone asks you for a favor you don't have room for, on a day you're already stretched thin. You know the answer should be no. And somehow, saying that one word feels less like a boundary and more like you've just done something wrong to another person, something you now have to make up for. So you find yourself saying yes before you've even finished thinking it through, already rearranging your own week to make room for it. Or you say no, and then spend the next 20 minutes explaining, apologizing, offering an alternative, anything to soften the fact that you just declined something you had every right to decline without any explanation at all. That reaction isn't just politeness, and it isn't really about the favor itself. It's a specific, documented response, and it has a name. Naming it. Therapist Pete Walker described it as the Fawn response, a fourth reaction alongside fight, flight, and freeze, in which a person responds to potential conflict not by resisting or escaping it, but by appeasing it, prioritizing the other person's comfort over their own needs in order to avoid confrontation altogether. Related work on what's called sociometer theory, developed by psychologist Mark Leary, proposes that self-esteem functions less like a personal report card you check occasionally and more like a gauge, constantly and automatically measuring your risk of being excluded by the people around you, often below the level of conscious thought. That explains the mechanism behind the discomfort. Leary's research found that this gauge reacts most strongly not to actual rejection, but to the mere possibility of it, which is part of why it can fire so hard over something as small as a hesitant reply. But that still doesn't explain why the gauge would register a simple, reasonable no as an actual threat worth appeasing in the first place. The historical layer. In small interdependent groups of maybe 30 to 50 people, there was no version of a stranger you'd never see again, no low-stakes interaction that simply didn't matter in the long run. Every relationship was ongoing, and every person in the group was someone you might genuinely need tomorrow, for food, for protection, for information or skills you couldn't get anywhere else. Damaging a relationship, even slightly, carried compounding risk over time because there was no larger network to fall back on if this one person decided you weren't worth their continued support. Appeasement, going along with a request even at personal cost, was often the safer, more survivable choice, especially for someone with less social or physical power within the group. It wasn't weakness. It was a working, rational strategy in an environment where you genuinely could not afford to lose people and where every relationship carried real weight. The modern amplification. Most of us now live surrounded by far more people than any small band ever held, most of whom we could lose entirely tomorrow with no real consequence to our safety or survival. But the sociometer doesn't know that, and it never got the memo. It still treats a coworker's mild disappointment, a friend's slightly cooler reply, a stranger's disapproving comment online, as if your entire support system were on the line, the same way it would have in a tribe of 30 people. Add in performance reviews, client ratings, and public comment sections where disapproval is visible and quantifiable to everyone at once, and that old gauge has more inputs to react to than it's ever had in its history. Most of them from people who barely factor into your actual day-to-day survival. Notice how it actually shows up. It's saying yes before you've even finished considering whether you actually have the time or energy. It's over-explaining a simple no with 3 unnecessary reasons as if the person is owed a defense. It's feeling guilty for hours, sometimes days after turning down something you had every reasonable right to decline. It's the small relief you feel when someone else says no first, so you don't have to be the one who does. It's rehearsing a no in your head for 10 minutes before a conversation and still caving the second the other person's face falls. It's agreeing to something out loud while a much quieter, more honest voice inside you is already dreading it. The reframe. Here's what's actually happening. That gauge isn't measuring whether you did something wrong to another person. It's measuring perceived exclusion risk using rules built for a world where losing one relationship could genuinely be catastrophic to your survival. In your actual life today, a reasonable no to a reasonable request rarely costs what it feels like it costs in the moment. The alarm is old. The stakes it's reacting to mostly aren't, even though the feeling itself is completely real. Close. So next time a simple no sits in your chest like you've wronged someone, try naming what's actually happening. That's not evidence you did something wrong. That's a very old system still bracing for a kind of loss that isn't on the table anymore in the life you actually live. You're allowed to say no. The discomfort afterward isn't proof you shouldn't have. It's just an old alarm that hasn't been told the tribe got bigger and that you were never actually in danger of losing it over one honest answer.